Hi, my name is Claire. I used to be a wife, a friend, a daughter. Then one day I disappeared, except I didn't. While the world prayed and posted about me, I was locked in the basement beneath my own house, listening to my husband laugh upstairs with his mistress, wearing my perfume, sleeping in my bed. They said I must have lost it, that I left. But no, he planned it. He buried me, alive, in plain sight. Now I'm back. And the truth? The truth doesn't need to scream. It just needs to be heard. Before we dive in, tell me, where are you listening from? And what would you do if your entire family believed your disappearance was for the best? Drop it in the comments. Let's begin. That morning began the way most of my mornings did. I woke before the house stirred, patted across the kitchen floor I'd chosen plank by plank, and brewed coffee strong enough to cut through the fog in my head. The counters still held the faint shine from the polish I used every Sunday. My jewelry tray sat where it always did, by the window catching the early light. I fastened the same gold bracelet I wore almost every day. The one my husband once said made me look put together, even when I felt anything but. I remember thinking how ordinary everything felt, comforting even. This was my house, my routine, my life. My husband came in quietly, his footsteps measured, his voice soft when he greeted me. Too soft. He asked if I'd slept well, if my back still hurt, if I'd remembered to take my vitamins. The questions landed like concern, but something about the way he avoided my eyes made my stomach tighten. He suggested I take it easy that day, said the weather was turning, that the basement might be a better place to sort through the old boxes, somewhere cool and dry where I wouldn't strain myself. I hesitated, not because I was afraid, but because I didn't understand why he was suddenly so attentive. He smiled and squeezed my shoulder, just long enough to reassure me. "It'll only take a minute," he said. "I'll be right upstairs." I told myself not to overthink it. Marriage is built on trust, I reminded myself. You don't question every small thing, or you'll go crazy. The stairs to the basement were narrow and unfinished. I noticed the chill before I reached the bottom, the air heavier, damp in a way that clung to my clothes. The walls were bare concrete, mottled with dark patches where moisture had settled over the years. I caught the scent of dust and something metallic, old water pipes maybe. My eyes adjusted slowly, and I realized how little light filtered down from above. He stood at the top of the steps, one hand resting on the door, explaining again how this was temporary. A day or two at most, just until things settled down. He said it like he was doing me a favor, like this was a solution to a problem I hadn't known existed. I nodded. I don't know why. Maybe because I was still waiting for the moment where it all made sense. The door closed with a sound that felt heavier than it should have. Not a slam. Just a firm, final click as it met the frame. I heard the lock turn once, clean, decisive. The noise echoed longer than I expected, filling the space until there was nothing else. I stood still. The light from the stairwell vanished, leaving me in a dim gray hush. I tried the handle once. It didn't budge. I didn't yank it or shout his name. I just stood there, listening to the quiet, aware for the first time that no sound traveled upward from where I was. On the hook by the door, I noticed the keyring as it swung slightly, then disappeared when the door sealed completely. One key caught the light before it was gone, rusted, worn smooth from years of use. I registered it without understanding why it mattered. For a long moment, I told myself this was a misunderstanding, that he'd open the door any second, laugh it off, apologize for the scare. I went through the list of reasons he wouldn't do this. Our shared accounts, our public life, the dinners with friends who admired us, the way people said we were solid, dependable. I sat on a storage crate and pressed my palms against my knees, breathing slowly, convincing myself that staying calm was the smart move. Panic wouldn't help. Reason would. I'd always been the reasonable one. Time slipped in strange pieces. The basement had no clock, no windows. I counted my breaths, then the faint hum of pipes, then the quiet stretches between my thoughts. Hours passed, maybe longer. My phone stayed dark, no vibrations, no voices calling my name. By the time I realized the house above me was still going on without me, the truth settled in with a weight I can still feel in my chest. My absence hadn't caused a ripple. No one came looking, no one asked questions. That was when something colder than fear took hold. Not the fact that I was locked away, but that my life had been easy to step into, easy to erase. I didn't know it yet, but by the time the first night ended, someone else was already living my life upstairs. I didn't know it yet, but by the time the first night ended, someone else was already living my life upstairs. That truth didn't arrive all at once. It seeped in slowly, the way cold does when you're not dressed for it. I woke on the concrete floor with my coat folded under my head and listened. At first there was nothing, then the house breathed. Footsteps crossed the ceiling, steady and familiar. A cabinet door opened, the soft thud of a mug on a counter, followed by the scrape of a chair being pulled back. Someone hummed, off-key, a tune I recognized because I used to hum it when I thought no one could hear me. The sound settled into my chest and stayed there. Morning above me looked exactly like my mornings had looked. Water ran through pipes, paused, then ran again. A radio clicked on for a few minutes and then went silent. I imagined the light through the kitchen windows, the way it hit the table at an angle that made dust float like glitter. That had been my view. Now it was hers. I told myself it could be a guest, a relative, anyone but who my instincts already named. I pressed my palm against the ceiling, not hard enough to make a noise, just enough to feel the vibration of a life moving forward without me. The house was alive. I was not part of it. Days passed. The chill eased slightly as winter loosened its grip, but the damp never left. Each afternoon brought new sounds. Laughter this time. A woman's laugh, light and careless, drifting down as if it belonged there. I didn't need to see her to know. The way she walked told me everything. Quick steps, confident, like she already knew where things were kept. The cadence of her voice when she spoke on the phone matched the rhythm of someone comfortable, settled. She didn't whisper, she didn't hide. That was the part that made my hands shake. Whatever this was, it wasn't a secret. One evening, I heard drawers slide open in the bedroom above me. Not rushed, not guilty. Metal touched metal, a soft chime I recognized instantly. Jewelry. My breath caught, not because of the value, but because of the order. I kept certain pieces together for a reason. When the sound paused, then resumed, I knew she was choosing. Later that night, when I crept close to the bottom of the stairs to listen, I saw it. A mirror leaned against the wall near the landing, something I hadn't put there. In its corner, just enough to catch the light, was a reflection of her neck as she passed by. Around it hung a necklace I hadn't worn in years. It had belonged to my mother. She'd given it to me on a quiet afternoon, pressing it into my hand like a promise. Seeing it rest against another woman's skin felt like a line being crossed that couldn't be erased. I sat back against the wall and waited for the rush of anger. It didn't come. What came instead was clarity. Mail began to arrive upstairs. I heard the slot open, the envelopes hit the floor. My name was spoken casually when deliveries came. "You can just leave it," my husband said once, his tone practiced. Invitations followed, voices discussed schedules, dinners, weekend plans. My name moved through those conversations as if it still belonged to me. This wasn't an affair unfolding in shadows. This was a handover. By the third week, I understood the pattern. She woke when I used to wake. She showered in the evenings, the pipes singing the same tired song. She laughed at the same jokes he once laughed at with me. They weren't improvising, they were living from a script I had written without knowing it. The humiliation wasn't loud. It didn't announce itself. It worked quietly, through recognition, through hearing my life repeated with different footsteps. At night, I used to knock on the door, not hard, just enough to remind him I was still there. I called his name once or twice, careful not to sound desperate. I told myself it was strategy, that patience would bring reason back into the room. Then one night, I didn't stand up. I stayed seated on the floor, my back against the wall, and let the house settle. The laughter above me faded. The lights clicked off one by one. The silence returned, thicker than before. I stopped calling for him. Not because I gave up, but because I finally understood the rules had changed, and survival meant listening before speaking. That was the night I understood something worse than betrayal had already happened. I couldn't sleep that night, not because of fear. Fear had passed. What stayed with me was something colder, something that settled in my bones and refused to let go. A quiet understanding that I was no longer just locked in the basement. I had been erased. The days started blending together after that. Without a clock or sunlight, I began to mark time by the rhythm of the house above me. The flushing of a toilet in the morning, the blender at lunchtime, the sound of chairs scraping back and forth on hardwood. It wasn't the kind of noise that offered hope. It was noise that reminded me I didn't belong to that life anymore. I strained for anything, an unfamiliar knock at the door, a car pulling up at a strange hour, the voice of someone I didn't recognize asking questions. But none of that came, just the same voices, the same footsteps. My world shrank to four walls and echoes. And that's when it hit me. If anyone were looking for me, I would have heard it by now. I started thinking about my sister. We used to talk every other Sunday. She'd complain about her kids, and I'd nod along, offering the kind of calm she said she needed. Had she tried to call? Had she just accepted it? Then I thought about my childhood best friend, Karen. She lived just 20 minutes away. We hadn't been as close in recent years, but we still sent each other birthday messages. Surely she would have noticed. Or maybe she thought I'd gone off the grid for some self-care, some silent retreat, something we always joked about doing but never did. The truth crept in slowly. No one had noticed because I'd made it too easy to overlook me. For years, I'd trained everyone around me to expect nothing. I never made demands. I kept my voice soft, my needs quiet. I said, "I'm fine," when I wasn't. I apologized even when I was right. I didn't rock the boat. I told myself it was kindness. But really, I was just disappearing in slow motion. That's what made this part hurt more than the betrayal itself. My silence had become so expected that no one questioned it when it grew louder. One afternoon, I sat under the vents, hoping for some proof, some mistake, some slip, and I heard it. A phone call upstairs. His voice, smooth and steady, the way it always was when he wanted to sound like he had it all together. He said my name, laughed, said something like, "She just needed space. You know how she gets." The person on the other end must have asked something because he followed up quickly. "Yeah, she's fine. Just resting, figuring things out." Resting, figuring things out. I felt a laugh start to rise in my throat, but stopped it before it escaped. He had created a story, and worse, it worked. I leaned back and let my head rest against the cold wall. That's when the next realization came. It wasn't just that people believed him, it was that they wanted to. His version of me, fragile, overwhelmed, possibly unstable, was easier to accept than the truth. The real story was messy and uncomfortable. The lie was neat and familiar. He'd painted me in shades that matched everyone's assumptions. A woman who overthinks. A wife who might have needed a break. The one who always smiled a little too tightly, excused herself too quickly. No one had to look beneath that. No one wanted to. I don't remember how long I sat there, maybe hours. I closed my eyes and tried to imagine my sister pushing past her busy schedule, showing up at the house, demanding to see me. I pictured Karen writing me, worried, asking why I hadn't replied. I tried to hold on to that fantasy, then I let it go. There was no rescue coming, no flashing lights, no sudden pounding on the basement door. If I was going to survive, it wouldn't be because someone saved me. It would be because I figured out how to save myself. Hope didn't die that day. It just changed. It stopped looking like someone else's footsteps. It started sounding like my own breath, steady and quiet in the dark. That was when I understood the basement wasn't the real prison. And once I saw that, I couldn't unsee it. The real prison wasn't the locked basement door. It was the invisible cage I'd been stepping into for years without realizing, built out of contracts, polite conversations, and trust disguised as paperwork. The kind of trust women like me were raised to offer without reading the fine print. I started thinking about the house, not in the dreamy way I used to, when I picked out tile samples or walked the empty shell with a hard hat on my head and a contractor trailing behind me. No, now I thought about the house as an object, a structure, a legal entity. Brick and wood and liability insurance. I thought about how it came to be. We'd just celebrated our 9th anniversary. He said, "Let's build something together." At the time, I thought he meant a home, a future, something shared. I didn't realize he meant a structure he could control, one I would fund but never truly own. I paid for that house. My name was on the mortgage, my credit history, spotless. He'd gone through a rough patch before we met, something about a failed business deal and a lawsuit. His name carried risk. Mine, however, gave us approval. He told me, "You've got the clean record, sweetheart. It just makes sense." And it did, back then. Or maybe I wanted it to. I remember sitting at the long table in the title company's office. The woman handed me a pen and said, "Sign here, here, and initial there." And I did, without hesitation. Not because I didn't care, but because I believed in us, in him, in what I thought was ours. Now, months into this silence, I began mentally unraveling the paper trail. The joint accounts, which I'd stopped monitoring, once he took over the finances to make things easier. The insurance policies that showed both our names, but listed him as the primary contact. The utilities that suddenly started arriving in his name. I'd seen it as helpful, generous. "You already do so much," he'd say. "Let me take this off your plate." What he really meant was, let me take control. And I let him. That was the part I kept circling back to. I hadn't just been tricked, I'd cooperated. That realization hurt more than the lock on the door. Because control isn't about whose name is on the document. It's about who has access. I could own the whole house on paper, but I couldn't step past the concrete walls around me. Meanwhile, he walked freely upstairs, turning my name into a punchline and my things into handouts. Power isn't about payment, it's about proximity, access, movement. He started checking the lock more often now, but not out of fear. There was a calmness to it, almost like a ritual, as if he didn't think I'd try anything, as if he believed the basement had broken me into obedience. I noticed how he paused sometimes, holding the knob for a beat before turning it. Not to taunt, just to remind us both who was in charge. And in those pauses, something in me shifted. I stopped reacting. I stopped jumping at every sound or flinching when the footsteps came close. Instead, I watched. I memorized patterns. When he opened the door to toss down supplies, how long it took him to come back, what he carried, what he didn't. At night, I lay still and let my mind work like a machine, cataloging information. He always used the same key, worn down at the edges. He kept it on a separate ring from his car keys. He double-checked the bolt twice, always twice. I'd hear the metallic click-click, then a breath, then retreating footsteps. That's when it changed. I stopped being a victim and started becoming an observer. No more crying, no more pleading, just listening, learning, preparing. I began to see the house as a map and every sound above me as a clue. I'd been in the dark but not blind. Every drawer opened upstairs, every faucet turned, every distant voice. They all told me something. They gave me pieces of the puzzle I was starting to understand. One morning, at least I think it was morning, based on the light, I made a quiet promise to myself. I will not beg again, not for mercy, not for kindness, not for recognition. If I was going to get out of here, it wouldn't be because he decided I'd earned it. It would be because I'd planned for it, down to the last second. This wasn't hope. This wasn't even survival. This was strategy. He thought the lock made him powerful, but it was teaching me how he thought. The lock had trained me to listen, so when the rhythm changed, I noticed. He came down the steps himself that afternoon, not with the hurried clatter I'd grown used to, not tossing a bag onto the floor and leaving without a word. This time, his shoes moved carefully, like he didn't want to startle an animal. He stood at the bottom of the stairs and looked around as if the room were new to him. I sat still, my back against the wall, my hands folded, calm in a way that surprised even me. He didn't apologize. He didn't explain. He didn't ask how I was doing. He spoke the way people do when they've already decided something and just need to inform you of the outcome. "We need to be clear," he said, as if we were discussing a lease renewal or a change in insurance coverage. "This situation isn't temporary." The words settled between us, heavy and deliberate. He went on, outlining logistics. Who would handle what? How things would look from the outside. He used phrases like simpler this way and less disruptive. He talked about schedules and expectations, about keeping things smooth. Then he said the sentence, not raised, not cruel, just clean and final. "You're not my wife anymore," he said. "You're my contingency." I felt something tear inside me, not loudly. It didn't explode or shatter. It split quietly, the way fabric gives way when it's been worn thin. Contingency, a backup plan, a problem set aside, something you keep out of sight in case something else fails. I didn't scream, I didn't cry, I didn't even ask what he meant, because I already knew. He wasn't planning for my return. He was planning for my usefulness, for how I could still serve a purpose without existing. He glanced at his watch, as if aware of time for the first time since he arrived. "This is for the best," he added, the way people do when they want absolution without effort. When he left, the door closed the same way it always did. Click, click. Silence. I slid down the wall until I was sitting on the floor, and then everything I'd been holding back came loose. I replayed years of moments I'd excused, his impatience framed as stress, his control framed as concern. Every time I'd told myself I was being sensitive, every time I'd chosen peace over clarity. The embarrassment burned worse than the grief, not just because of what he'd done, but because of how long I'd let him do it. I wondered how many people had seen this coming, how many had waited for me to wake up while I kept insisting everything was fine. I thought about the dinners where he spoke for me, the meetings where he interrupted and I let him, the jokes at my expense that I laughed along with so no one would feel uncomfortable. I felt small, ashamed, angry at myself in a way that made breathing feel like work. For a moment, just one, I considered bargaining. What if I apologized? What if I took responsibility for things that weren't mine? What if I promised to be quieter, easier, more grateful? I imagined telling myself that silence could still be survival, just one more time. Then the thought stopped me cold. If I stayed silent now, I wouldn't survive. I'd vanish completely. That was the line I would never cross again. The room felt smaller after that realization, but my spine felt straighter. Later, much later, I heard a different sound. Not his footsteps, not the familiar routines. A pause near the stairs, a soft shuffle, then a voice I didn't recognize, low and uncertain. "Hello?" it said, not loudly, just enough to be heard. I didn't answer, I didn't move, but the voice lingered, a breath, a murmur, someone adjusting something near the door. I caught a glimpse through the narrow gap, just a shadow, a sliver of movement. Someone knew I existed. They didn't open the door. They didn't save me. But they hesitated, and that hesitation was enough. It reminded me I was still real, still seen, even if only for a second, still human. That night, curled on the floor, I stopped imagining a version of my life where I was welcomed back upstairs. That was the night I stopped imagining a way back and started imagining a way out. That night, when I stopped imagining a way back and started picturing something else entirely, I didn't cry. I didn't sleep either. My mind was too alert, strangely clear. For the first time in over a year, I wasn't waiting. I was watching. I used to count prayers, whispers in the dark, bargains with nothing, with no one. But prayers ask for permission. I was done asking. From then on, I counted footsteps. I counted the times the door clicked. I tracked how long it took him to go from the front hallway to the kitchen. The gaps between his visits. The groceries that came in. The trash that didn't go out. I didn't keep time with a clock. I didn't need to. I measured in meals that never arrived, in days between the change in air when the heat clicked on or when it stopped. I marked the shifts in light that crept in from under the door. There was a rhythm, and he was too arrogant to think I could hear it. It was early summer now, though I only knew that from the way the air felt heavier, warmer against the walls. I imagined the garden out back, probably overgrown by now. The tulips I planted last spring would have bloomed without me. I found that thought oddly comforting. Life still moved up there, whether he acknowledged me or not. Each day, I'd sit in silence, piecing together the puzzle that was his routine. Mornings, short bursts of motion, hurried footsteps, the occasional slammed drawer. He was always gone by the time the sun shifted past the basement window. Afternoons, quiet. Evenings were lazier, music sometimes, a woman's voice more often now. Always hers, never mine. He thought being predictable made him strong. He thought I was too broken to notice. But I noticed everything. And then, one day, I noticed something I shouldn't have. It was subtle, at first. A faint sound I'd never heard before, like the soft hum of a fridge, but lower, more mechanical. It came from the far corner of the ceiling, near the pipe that always dripped in spring. I looked up. There, nestled between the old insulation and a wooden beam, was a small glint. Glass catching light, a lens, a camera. I froze, not from fear but calculation. I didn't flinch. I didn't gasp. I sat perfectly still and let my eyes slide away as if I hadn't seen it at all. So, that's what this was now. Not just a prison, a monitored one. He wasn't worried about me escaping. He was worried about what I might become if I wasn't watched. I spent the next 2 days barely moving. Every blink, every breath was deliberate. I used the bathroom only when the hum paused, proof that the camera wasn't running constantly. He was reviewing footage selectively, maybe when something triggered it. I learned its blind spots quickly. I figured out the range, how to stay just out of sight when I needed privacy. I knew now he didn't trust silence. He wanted proof I stayed broken. But that was his mistake. Because if the camera was watching me, I could watch it too. From that moment on, I gave him nothing. I stopped pacing, I stopped whispering. I sat when I could, stood when I needed to, and never looked up again. I became furniture, background noise, harmless. And while I became invisible, I studied. I charted everything. When the door opened and for how long. What shoes he wore when he left. If he wore sneakers, he was out for longer. If boots, he was running errands nearby. I even kept mental tabs on the kind of food wrappers that fell through the cracks of the floorboards. He was slipping, getting comfortable, forgetting I had a mind. He thought the camera kept him safe. But I knew something he didn't. Every system meant to control someone eventually reveals its pattern. And every pattern has a flaw. At night, lying on the cold floor with my arms wrapped tight around myself, I practiced. Not physically, there was nowhere to move. But in my mind, I rehearsed the moment I'd walk past him. Calm, direct, no pleading, no questions. I imagined the look on his face. Not of fear, of confusion. He wouldn't understand how I got there, because he didn't know that I'd stopped being afraid of him a long time ago. He didn't know that watching me taught me more than it taught him. He didn't know that silence, when chosen, is not submission, it's strategy. And above all, he didn't know that I had started to see the cracks in his armor. He thought the camera protected him, but it was teaching me when he felt safest. I had been learning him in reverse, not who he used to be, but who he had become when no one was watching, when he believed no one would ever question him again. It was late summer now, the air heavier, almost sour down here. The basement smelled like wet paper and dust that hadn't moved in years. I couldn't see the calendar, but I didn't need one anymore. I knew the length of the days from the slant of light creeping under the door, the stillness in the house when August heat made movement upstairs sluggish. Then something changed. At first, it was subtle. The pacing of life above me slowed, not in the lazy, summer drift kind of way, but in a focused, clipped rhythm. Conversations stopped happening in passing. No more laughing phone calls drifting through the vents. No more careless humming while he moved between rooms. Even the woman's voice, the one who used to visit more often, was quieter now, her tone clipped, like she was reading from a script. It wasn't absence, it was calculation. Something was being arranged. And for the first time in months, I felt danger that wasn't just emotional. It was logistical, legal, permanent. One morning, I heard a man's voice I hadn't heard before. It wasn't friendly, it was dry, official. The tone people use when they've been sent to confirm something, when they don't expect to be questioned. I crept to the vent near the bottom of the stairs, the one that barely carried sound. "She left. She didn't say goodbye to anyone," the man said flatly. "No note?" someone else asked. Female, hesitant. Maybe the woman I'd heard before. "She was overwhelmed. It's been a hard year. She wasn't stable." I froze. My breath caught somewhere between my ribs. "She moved on," the voice continued. "It's better for everyone. She couldn't handle it." Moved on. Gone. Overwhelmed. The words weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. They were said softly, with the finality of someone closing a door they never intended to open again. And that made them even more lethal. He was rewriting me in real time. To the world outside, I no longer existed, not in a tragic, mourned way, just erased, like a line in a ledger that didn't balance and was simply crossed out. I sat there, shivering despite the heat, pressing in through the floorboards. Not from cold, but from the growing realization, he wasn't just hiding me. He was preparing to erase me completely. A few days later, the storm came. The kind of summer storm that rolls in fast, cracking thunder, sideways rain hammering the windows. I heard it build for hours, the thunder vibrating the pipes above. Then, around midnight, I felt the first trickle of water seep through the far corner of the basement. It wasn't new. That corner always leaked in bad storms. We'd talked about fixing it, back when we still shared a bed, when he still cared about things like repair bills and warranties. Back when I was still a person in his eyes. But now the water wasn't just a leak, it was a message. The storm raged on through the night, and the door, usually opened once in the morning for food or a quick check, stayed shut. By midday, water had reached the edge of my mattress. Everything I had was damp. My shoes floated in shallow puddles. The camera's red light blinked steadily above me, recording everything. I knocked once, lightly, then again, louder. Still nothing. He knew. He had to know. He could hear the sump pump failing. He could see the camera feed. He could smell the mildew spreading under the door. But he didn't come, because he didn't need to. I understood it now. This wasn't carelessness. It was convenience. If the basement flooded and I drowned in my sleep, it wouldn't look like violence. It would look like a tragedy, a forgotten space, an accident, a woman who wandered off and was never found. All it would take was silence. A few forged papers, maybe even a sympathetic quote from him in the local news. She was struggling. We tried to help. I had spent so long waiting to be saved, fearing confrontation, holding on to the idea that somewhere in this mess was still a version of him who might snap out of it. But the man who used to know my favorite wine, the man who once rubbed my feet on long car rides, that man had left the house long before I did. What remained was strategy. And he was betting on my compliance, on my softness, on my silence. But I had changed. That night, as the water lapped against the legs of the table, I made a decision I couldn't take back. No more waiting. No more believing that surviving this was enough. If I made it out, it wouldn't be quiet. It wouldn't be dignified. I wouldn't leave like a ghost. I wouldn't let the last chapter of my life be written by the man who locked the door. This wasn't about escape anymore. It was about ending the lie. If he wanted me erased quietly, I would make sure the truth came out loudly. That promise echoed in my chest like a steady drumbeat. The fear hadn't vanished. It never did, but it had evolved. It no longer pulled me into a corner. It sharpened me. And when early fall settled in and the air shifted from thick to crisp, I felt something else changing too. He came down one morning without warning. No footsteps, no creak on the top stair. Just the sound of the key grinding into the lock, turning once, sharply, like it had been waiting too long to move. He opened the door halfway, then stepped in like he still owned the space. His eyes swept the room, dry now after the flooding, but he didn't look at me. "This can't keep going," he said. Not angry, not apologetic, just, "Done." His voice was clipped, like he was reading from something rehearsed. "You've been down here long enough. You're tired. I'm tired. It's time to finish this. Quietly." That word again. Quietly. He wasn't offering freedom. He was offering closure. On his terms. He stepped further into the room, and I saw it in his hands. A manila folder. Thick, worn at the edges. I knew that kind of folder. I'd built my life filing papers like that. Mortgages, medical releases, tax forms. "I've spoken with professionals," he said. "They understand your condition. You haven't been well, and I've done what I could." My breath caught. "They agree that you were under pressure. It's documented. You left work. You withdrew. You chose to isolate." I said nothing. Let him talk. "There's paperwork, statements, even from your sister. She was worried about you, too." He looked at me then, expecting a flinch. Expecting me to crack, to plead, to weep at the mention of someone from my old life being pulled into this lie. But I stayed still. The calm wasn't fake. It came from finally understanding. He wasn't planning to hurt me physically. He didn't need to. He believed he'd already won. He thought the system would shelter him, that no one would ask questions, that mental health was a blanket thick enough to smother any resistance. Then he slipped. "It's all dated too," he added casually, "including the day you packed up and left that note." But I never left a note. He smiled like a man laying down the final card in a winning hand. Except now I saw it, clear as daylight. The timeline didn't match. He referenced a day no one should have known about, not unless they'd forged it themselves, not unless they'd constructed the narrative before the lie even began. I didn't flinch. I watched him, and for the first time, I wasn't seeing the man who locked me away. I was seeing someone who had become so sure of his version of events, he didn't realize he'd already confessed. He stepped back toward the door, folder still in hand. "I'm unlocking this now," he said, almost like a warning. "You can come up, but things are going to be different." He meant managed, controlled, documented. But as he turned the key again, something happened that he didn't notice, or maybe he didn't care. He set the key down. It clinked gently on the metal shelf by the stairs, rusted from years of moisture. The same key he used every day, the same key that had been the symbol of my captivity. And now, for him, it was just an object, not a threat, not a safeguard, just metal. He walked toward the stairs, folder under his arm, talking more to himself than me. I stood, not slowly, not shakily, just with the kind of stillness that comes from knowing you no longer owe anyone an explanation. He didn't notice right away. I walked behind him, each step quiet but deliberate. He turned when I reached the third stair, surprised to see me upright. Not begging, not breaking down, just walking. "Where are you going?" he asked. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Because the moment he let me walk behind him, past the shelf, past the key, past his voice, was the moment he gave up ownership of this ending. I paused just long enough to touch the rusted key with the edge of my fingertips. Not to take it, not to carry it with me, just to feel it, remember it. Then I left it there and walked out. I didn't run when I stepped into the light, because what came next was the part he couldn't escape. I crossed the threshold slowly, careful not to breathe too deeply. The outside air smelled like rain and pavement, and a world that hadn't paused for me. Everything looked brighter than I remembered. Not beautiful, just excessive. Colors were too saturated, the space too open. I blinked at the sky like someone seeing a stranger they used to know well. The noise was worse, leaves rustling, cars in the distance, someone hammering 2 blocks over. Each sound cut through me like a reminder that life had kept moving without asking where I'd been. It wasn't the freedom I'd dreamed of. It wasn't even relief. It was like stepping into a room where everyone had already been talking and realizing you'd forgotten the language. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just kept walking, one step at a time, until I reached the edge of his property and kept going. The sidewalk felt too smooth under my feet. The first stop sign I saw looked like a monument. I remember thinking, no one knows I'm here. No one knows I'm not there anymore. The truth didn't pour out of me. There was no screaming at the gates, no camera crews, no frantic phone calls. Instead, I walked into a local police station with my spine straight and my story told in bullet points. I had evidence, I had names. I had a calendar etched in memory and the broken pieces of a life that didn't need embellishing. I told it all to a woman behind a desk who didn't flinch, didn't interrupt. She just took notes. That was how it started, quietly. There were follow-up interviews, forms, recorded statements. An officer asked if I wanted a lawyer present. I said yes, not because I was unsure, because I was done doing anything alone. My name started to appear on files again. Systems that had once erased me now had to acknowledge me. I didn't post online. I didn't call his family or shout through a courtroom. The truth moved without theatrics. My words became exhibits. My timeline became a chain of inconsistencies that couldn't be explained away. I heard through others, carefully distanced, that his story began to unravel within days. He claimed I'd left on my own, that I'd needed space. He leaned on language that sounded concerned, humane, measured. But people asked questions. Questions about timing, about why no one had seen me, about the camera he forgot to uninstall, about the folder of documents prepared long before I disappeared. Neighbors, co-workers, even his own brother started whispering, then stepping back. He stopped showing up to his favorite bar. His emails stopped getting replies. His voice, once so smooth and practiced, began to sound defensive, then desperate. I didn't watch it happen directly. I didn't need to. From a safe place, an apartment offered temporarily by a friend of a friend, I saw enough to know the walls were closing in. I received a letter from his attorney, then another. They said nothing useful. Just attempts to reframe, to settle, to control the ending. I didn't respond, because it wasn't about him anymore. What hurt most wasn't the basement or the lies or even the years. It was what I came back to and didn't find. Some people cried when they saw me again. Some stared like they couldn't decide if they were relieved or ashamed. One person hugged me like they meant it, then never called again. And some I never heard from at all. No explanation, no "I'm sorry," just absence. I understood. Not everyone wants to face the mirror. It's easier to believe someone vanished than to accept they were trapped while you looked away. But I did hear from my sister. It took weeks. She came to see me, her hands shaking, voice soft, almost asking for permission to grieve what she'd ignored. She said she'd believed the version he fed her because it made more sense than the silence. She said, "I didn't know how to fight for you when I couldn't explain what was wrong." I told her I wasn't looking for perfect reactions. I just wanted honesty now. We talked until it was dark out. We cried, not for the past, but for the chances we still had. That was enough. I didn't get my old job back. I didn't try. I didn't go back to the house. I started small, grocery shopping without watching my back, reading without looking over my shoulder, sleeping through the night without checking the lock. And the most surprising thing, I didn't need revenge. What survived with me was quieter, deeper, clarity, self-respect. A calm I'd never had before, the kind that doesn't beg to be understood. I didn't lock doors behind me anymore, not because I trusted everyone, but because I trusted myself. When someone asked casually, "Whatever happened to that guy?" I didn't answer. I didn't owe it. The truth was out there. It would continue moving with or without my voice. My story didn't need retelling in gossip or echo chambers. It had already done what it needed to do. And me? I didn't walk out to destroy him. I walked out knowing he could never bury anyone again.